I'm really thrilled to be here today to talk about this topic, which I think has had more attention given to it in the last 5 or 6 years than I've seen in the previous 20 or 25, certainly. And if there's a silver lining to the financial crisis, it's that people focused on the financial system and focused on the retirement system much more than was the case before. Now, you may say I'm looking at the world through the glass half full, and maybe I'm stretching it a bit to try and find something good out of the financial crisis, but I do think it's a good thing to get society mobilized and not easy to do in a democracy. The title of my presentation is Rethinking Pension Systems, Different International Models, but I'm going to focus on a few specific points. I'm going to focus on some issues that I think all of us share across all countries, and then I'm going to do a deep dive into the Canadian system in a different light, looking at it on a segmented basis, and talk about how you end up with different conclusions depending on how you look at the information. So the challenges that are facing our system across the world are common and they're real. We saw it at this morning's session on essentially longer lives in retirement. People are also entering the workforce with education at a later stage. The whole demographics as well, with the way the aging population works in different countries, are resulting in a dependency ratio which has been increasing and will continue to increase in the decades ahead. And that essentially means those people that are in the age of retirement are getting larger and larger and larger as a percentage of the working age population. Obviously, governments are financially indebted and have increased that indebtedness over the last 5, 6 years. Markets have been volatile, and with real interest rates, in fact, at negative levels over the last 2 or 3 years, it's creating great stress on saving systems and on public pension systems, private savings, employer savings. The rates of savings are insufficient across most countries to make up for those deficits, and at the same time, as people are living longer, morbidity costs or costs of being in retirement, healthcare costs are increasing. So, you know, it's no doubt that it's not surprising that we're talking about this issue. It's not surprising the room is filled, and it's going to get more and more airtime as we move forward. Easy to get depressed about it. Easy to say the solutions or the problems are too big to solve. We can't obviously go there. We actually need to come up with a set of solutions. Now, there's lots of language around the pension debate, but there really are some fundamental questions that are behind every discussion that each country has. The first question that every country needs to answer is, what is an adequate level of income in retirement? And you can answer that very differently, and you can answer it for different groups in society differently. And once you've started to debate that, you start to say, well, who should provide that retirement income? Is it the government's role to provide it? Is it the employer's role? Is it the individual who should take care of themselves? And is that a different answer for different groups and at different income levels? What is the level of retirement income that the government should mandate versus encourage? That may be a different answer. We may be seeking one level of comfort in retirement. Should the government mandate that, or should the government seek a different level? Intergenerational equity. To what extent should people in retirement rely on the generation coming up behind us, behind them? And that plays itself out on pay-as-you-go plans. Many government plans are funded as you go, some are not, versus funded plans, which essentially the savings have been provided for. And then finally, there are many risks in retirement, and who should bear those risks? And those risks include behavioral. You know, what if we don't save enough? Investment risk, mortality risk, what if you live too long? And then risks of rising costs in retirement, morbidity, healthcare costs, inflation. There are many risks, and around every debate and every discussion, inherently in it is who should be bearing those risks. Now, I prefer to define the discussion as retirement income security rather than a pension issue solely. And the reason is that when you, first of all, say the word pension, it means different things in different countries. If you say pension in Canada, people think about the government pension plans, or they might think about an employer-defined benefit plan. They will rarely think about other elements of it. If you go in the UK, people think about pensions, they'll include private savings through tax-assisted vehicles. But in any version of the discussion, it's a very narrow definition. Really what we're talking about is how do we provide retirement income solutions to citizens of different countries. And when you define it that way, in fact, you deal with a broader suite of tools. You're defining a goal rather than a part of the solution. And you can start to get into discussions around pension plans, individual savings, private businesses, some part of real estate, and even labor in retirement, which is increasingly becoming something that many people want to do in addition to some people being forced to do. So there's a broader goal that I think we should be moving the discussion towards. I want to dive into Canada's retirement system, and I'm going to focus first on the current picture. First thing, as you look at Canada against a group of many large OECD countries, we're doing actually quite well. That is to say, people that are currently over the age of 65 in Canada are earning about 91% of the income of the population in general, which stacks up Canada pretty well currently against other large countries. This is OECD data. Also, if you look at poverty alleviation, Canada has a very low rate of elderly poverty, amongst the lowest of all of the countries. And again, this is using a common measure. This is people earning income less than 50% of the national average. And one reason that Canada's system is working well is that the basic value of government-provided retirement benefits is high as a percentage of the average population income. Again, the basic old age security, guaranteed income supplement, Quebec pension plan, Canada pension plan are providing a high level of income compared to the national average. So if Canada's system is currently providing good benefits, it is also scoring very well on a sustainability basis. So this is the Global Aging Preparedness Index prepared by the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, and looks at a variety of factors to try and project whether the system is sustainable into the future. Now, one reason why Canadians are faring so well is that the system is balanced. Canadians have four main pillars to draw on. Pillar 1 is basic old age security and guaranteed income supplement. Pillar 2 is the mandatory defined benefit plan of the Canadian and Quebec governments. But beyond that, you've got Pillar 3, which is employer-based defined benefit and defined contribution plans. There's about $1.75 billion in there. These are, by the way, 2010 numbers. And of that $1.1 billion, about $1 trillion of that is in DB plans, and about $100 billion is in DC plans. There's another $825 billion in registered retirement savings plans, basically individual tax-assisted savings plans. And then Pillar 4 is another $1.7 trillion of non-registered, non-tax-assisted stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. Now, in addition to that, there's also people own real estate, and there are private businesses that people own. And that's another $2.3 trillion of assets that Canadians have. Now, clearly that's not all available for retirement. People need to live in homes. You can't have everybody sell their house when they retire. But there's some portion of that that is available. People can downsize. They can sell secondary properties. Some private businesses can be sold to partners coming up. If you took 30% of that number, as some have suggested, there's another $700 billion of assets that could be available for Canadians in retirement. Now, the pillars 1 and 2 are mostly unfunded. There's $175 billion in 2010 in the Canada Pension Investment Board. That will grow over time. Trying to estimate exactly the liability value of that to put it in comparison to the assets, you get into a long debate on how to do that. But no matter how you calculate it, the private savings through employer or through individuals are a very, very significant part of what has allowed Canadians to be prepared for retirement and what will allow them to be prepared going forward. I want to make some comments on the work that's been done that I've read around the country, around different countries, on how they look at retirement. And there's some great work. It tends to be focused on macro data, looking at populations as a whole. And it then comes to generally very broad conclusions. I think what is needed is much more granular work done on different cohorts within the population. I think if in business you went after a market and you said, I'm going to use averages, you wouldn't be in business very long. You need to go and understand subsegments of the market, how they behave, what their situation is. I find there's not a lot of that in the material that I have looked at on the retirement debate around the world. Now, our group has worked very closely with McKinsey consultants over the last few years, and we, with McKinsey and Ipsos Reid, had a survey done at the end of 2010 that was the most comprehensive survey at that point, and I still think to this point, done of Canadians and what their financial situation is. And it not only looked at their balance sheet, but it looked at their income levels, their savings habits, their use of advice, what kind of pension plans they were in. And it came up with a very rich database, 18,000 Canadians. McKinsey then took that work and projected savings rates going forwards, depending on the cohorts people were in, using generations before them, and made assumptions regarding retirement age, investment returns, and came up with a retirement readiness index for every individual in the survey. So the retirement readiness index essentially looked at consumption, not income. The numerator being what is the income in retirement less taxes, less age-specific expenses, which in Canada are not that great because we have universality of medicine, but in other countries you have extra expenses in retirement. And they compared it to the consumption levels prior to retirement, which is essentially income less taxes, less savings, and then less work-related expenses. And they came up with the retirement readiness index. They then looked at consumption compression by Canadians. So taking a cohort, the cohort of Canadians from 1924 to 1938, definitely people in retirement compressed their consumption. And this is true across countries. There's been lots of studies on this. And they used as a minimum threshold then two levels, 80% minimum consumption for people in the lowest income bracket, because people in lower income brackets cannot compress their income as much. They've got basically housing and shelter and food represent a much larger portion of their income. And they use 65% for middle and higher income brackets as an appropriate cutoff rate. So when you look at Canadians overall, you end up with a retirement readiness index of 109%. It says Canadians are doing pretty well. It says they're actually on track, based on this survey of 18,000 people, to retire quite well. And the story is basically similar right across the country. But of course, averages are almost always misleading, and they lead to incorrect conclusions, and that would be the case if you looked at that 109 as being the answer. When there's actually a great variability amongst Canadians across the whole sample group. And in fact, 23% of Canadians are not on track to maintain the consumption thresholds of 80% or 65%, as the case may be. One of the things the survey looks at, and again we're on averages here, is if you look at the 5 income quintiles, starting at Q1, which is an average income of $20,000, and Q5 is $140,000. I should have mentioned they eliminated anybody in the survey who had income above $250, as looking at kind of the bulk of the population. You see the sources of income projected through their survey are very different. So in Q1, you've got 84% and 28% from Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. In other words, the Canadian basic programs are doing a good job of replacing income at the lower income levels. By the time you start moving into the income quartiles 4 and 5, the government programs are a small part of it, and it's much more reliant on private savings, either through employer plans or through individual savings. If you then start to break the data down on another cut and you start to get into segments, this is basically in each income and each age quartile, the percentage of that quartile, or cohort I should use, excuse me, which are not on track to replace 65 or 80% of their income. You get some interesting observations. First of all, lower income Canadians in Q1 and Q2 are generally in a good spot in terms of replacing their income. You can get into a debate about whether their income is adequate but that turns it from a pension debate into a poverty debate as to what is the minimum accepted level of income that we want Canadians to have. As you move from there and you look at a large group of young Canadians are not on track, but they still have time to save. You then have a large group of those who are approaching retirement age, up in the 55 to 64 range, and as you start to get to that age, if you haven't saved enough by that point, you're running out of time to do so, and so your solutions start to be different. And generally speaking, as you look at the higher income bands, you see that's where you have larger percentages of the population that have not saved enough to replace their income. If you then look at it from a solution point of view, if you looked at the Q1 and Q2 lower income brackets and the lower age, you'd say, well, generally these populations and these cohorts are doing well, but some people are not. One of the issues affecting that group is that old age security and guaranteed income supplements are indexed to inflation, whereas labor wages have been increasing above inflation and are projected to continue to do so, at least in the survey and historically. And so they fall behind with time because they're so dependent on that base level of income. So as you start to think about solutions, that ends up being one area where someone might look if you're trying to deal with those cohorts. If you deal with the middle and higher income younger age bracket, these people have time to save. They've got the means to save and they have time to save. So you start thinking about programs such as putting in group plans where employers don't have group plans. So the UK's NEST program, which is exactly doing that, a government-sponsored program. The Conservative government's PRPP program, basically trying to put in group plans, multi-employer group plans where companies don't have plans, which the Quebec government is endorsing and moving forward with. Those are targeted solutions that will affect these cohorts very well. As well, financial literacy, encouraging people to be aware, encouraging and supporting advice are all elements that can help that group. As you get into higher income, close to retirement groups that are in the higher income brackets, there's not a lot to do there. They may have time to save, but they may not have time to save depending on where they are. So their option is either to not be at the threshold or to work in retirement. From a policy point of view, you have to ask the question, is it a government's job to worry about a high income household that have not provided enough for retirement? And then you've got middle income people who are approaching retirement who are not prepared for retirement. In their case, maybe there is a policy response, maybe there's something financially that can be done, or you have legislation to encourage and facilitate work after 65. My point is that you come up with very different solutions when you look at different groups. And that's a key. And McKinsey looked at different solutions and targeted along the top different segments, and different proposals and different solutions you can come up with work well with one cohort. They don't address the problem with other cohorts. So you have a lot of debate around the issue where people are calling for major increases in the Canada Pension Plan or the Quebec Pension Plan, which is essentially saying across the board, take more money out of people that are working, have employers contribute more, and the CPP and the Quebec Pension Plan will provide more. Well, that's very interesting, but that's a massive blanketed solution that affects 100% of Canadians, when in fact you don't have 100% Canadians are requiring that, and in fact you have targeted solutions that can be much more efficient. You also have people calling for increases in the personal registered retirement savings limits. Some in our industry are calling for that. When you look at the data, that doesn't seem like a very smart thing to do. The issue isn't that people don't have enough limits on their tax-assisted savings, is that many that have those limits are not utilizing them. So it's about encouraging savings, not increasing the limits. Just a few other observations from the data that are interesting, looking across different cohorts along the top. The first is that those that have an employer savings program are much better off. You look in the two sides there on the right-hand side, much higher retirement readiness if they've got an employer plan at home. Home ownership is highly correlated to being ready for retirement. And remember, McKinsey did not include homes in their financial assets ready for retirement. So this is not about having equity in the home. This is about behavior. So people that buy a home get in the habit of saving, get in the habit of making their mortgage payments, get into a disciplined type of approach and end up saving more and being better prepared. And then financial advice is highly correlated to being prepared for retirement, particularly if you've been with an advisor for a long time. In fact, the Serrano group, which is a research group, took the database, went back and took 3,000 people in the survey and dug very deep in 2011 and looked at socioeconomic factors across the board to try and correlate whether financial advice had a positive effect on retirement preparedness. And he adjusted it for 50 variables, including income level, education level, socioeconomic background, and basically found that those with a financial advisor are far better off than those without a financial advisor, and the relationship with the financial advisor, the benefit increases with the time the person has been with the financial advisor. Again, this is adjusted for income. A lot of people say that financial advisors find the people with the money. They don't find people that allow them to find money. And this is across all income brackets. And finally, McKinsey's work showed that if you try and rely on one factor, you can't get there. So basically, at the top of the page is the 23% of Canadians that are not ready for retirement. And if you tried as a national goal to say, let's get that down to 11%, and you try and pull on one lever, if you tried on the side to put in a default contribution of all workers into an auto-enrollment plan, in other words, every employer is going to have a plan and we're going to default everybody into it, you'd have to have everybody contributing at 11% to get the overall national readiness down to 11%. If you tried to encourage private savings, you'd have to increase everybody's private savings by 8% of income. If you tried to increase the retirement age, and this is a bit of a joke, but you'd have to increase it to by 20 years. I think that's at that point where the nth person ends up being 11% left who have to work more than 20 years. And if you try to do it through increases in the CPP or the QPP, you'd have to increase the contribution rates by 11% across the board to get the rate down to 11. But if you use multiple levers, you can do small changes. If you can affect behavior, if you can get more plans at work, if you can do modest increases in the CPP, you can get to the same 11% of retirement readiness by using multiple levers. And so the lesson here is you've really got to look at this on a segmented basis and not come across with one blanket solution. It needs multiple solutions to be solved. Yeah, obviously, this is a game about balancing many objectives. And we've got the objective of income security. We also have to have systems that are affordable, sustainable. Intergenerational equity is an issue. Lots of debates on efficiency and scale of big plans versus individual freedom and ability to save and have control over your own capital, and sharing of risks. These are not easy objectives to balance. And every country comes at it from a different perspective. Their demographics are different. Their dependency ratios are different, their financial conditions are different, and perhaps most importantly, the social contract that exists between citizens and their government, what is expected of them and what they expect of their government is very different. And you've got different industry, the state of the industry and the infrastructure and financial services is different. So to suggest there's going to be one solution for every country is quite crazy, in fact. And perhaps the most telling slide of this is looking at currently people that are in retirement and where they get their income from. If you go to the top of the page, France is almost completely from public transfers. And if you go to the bottom of the page, in Canada, Australia, and the US, public transfers represent, in other words, public pension plans are a much smaller portion, and private savings, meaning the white, is capital that they've put aside, and then labor is the dark color, is a completely different mix. And so behind that very simple bar chart is a completely different set of industry factors and country factors. You can't come at this solution from a common basis. And my concluding messages are, I think that this has to be done on a segmented basis. Averages are going to lead to bad decisions. We need targeted solutions, not general solutions. I would also say we should build on what's working in every country. Do no harm would be a very good place to start with any changes that one might want to make. And balance is a virtue, and I think the Canadian system is a very good example of that. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.